G'day everyone, Stuart McMillen here. As you know, I like recommending books through this YouTube channel. For example, you can watch my video, Top 10 Essential Graphic Novels. With this particular video, I'm going to recommend some books for the cartoonists out there. These are books that explain the nuts and bolts of how to actually make comics. And since I'm a cartoonist myself, I'll be recommending books that I've read and have applied to my own work. Before I begin with the proper recommendations, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to James Kemsley's The Cartoon Book and The Cartoon Book 2. Now, these books are no longer in print, and I think that they were only ever published in Australia, but these were staples of Australian libraries during my childhood in the 90s and was such a great resource for me growing up. The focus definitely is on teaching school-age kids how to begin cartooning, but James definitely didn't skimp on the details for the older readers either. I wouldn't necessarily call these books essential for grown-up comics artists, given that they do have a young reader focus. But hey, if you can find second-hand copies of these books, I think you'll find them to be a great basic resource. And maybe a nice gift for a niece or nephew who likes cartooning. Anyway, that's just a quick plug for one of my childhood favourites. Now, on to the grown-up stuff. So the first book I'll mention here is Perspective for Comic Book Artists by David Chelsea. And the book is exactly what it says in the title. It's a guide to help you understand how to get accurate perspective in your drawings. Now, it's worth mentioning that the entire book is a non-fiction comic. So instead of just telling you what to do, it uses the Scott McCloud technique of showing and telling. It's a really clearly written guide to understand how to draw more realistically. David Chelsea uses Socratic dialogue between a teacher and student that explains how to draw one-point perspective, how to draw two-point perspective, and how to draw three-point perspective. He also gives a lot of general hints for making your comics look more realistic, like how you should pay attention to where your characters' heads are relative to the horizon, depending on the angle that you're using. So if the viewer's at the same height as the character depicted, the character's head should be on the horizon. If the viewer's looking from a low angle, the character's head should be above the horizon. If we're looking from a high angle, the character's head should be below the horizon. And yes, I hear you out there saying, oh, but I'm such a pure artist. I don't want my pure talent to be polluted by knowing the rules of art. Well, guess what? I'm a comics artist and I haven't been to any art classes since I was in grade 8, but I still think you ought to know what you're doing and you should stop hiding behind the excuse of being a self-taught artist. So get this book, understand what the rules are, and then break them afterwards. Perspective for Comic Book Artists by David Chelsea is a nifty book that'll help you to improve the nuts and bolts of your artwork. Now let's take a look at two books written by the husband and wife team of Jessica Abel and Matt Madden. The first book was released in 2008 and is called Drawing Words and Writing Pictures, and then they released a sequel 4 years later in 2012 titled Mastering Comics. These are both hefty books that have about 600 pages of content across both of these books, and they're designed to be a crash course into making comics. In fact, the authors say that they wrote the books to serve as a textbook that could be used to teach classes on comics at art schools. One thing that I really like about these books is how they really tell you step by step how to do things that a lot of experienced artists sometimes take for granted. Sometimes experienced artists forget that beginners don't know how to do basic things. For example, the book has the instructions for using nib pens, for using a brush and ink, and for doing the lettering of comics. I like that they illustrate how-to guides with plenty of visual examples that make these do's and don'ts clear to understand. Now, I must say that the first book basically ignores the possibility of creating comics digitally with a graphics tablet. The first book is very much geared towards creating comics with pen and ink and then scanning into a computer afterwards. But the second book does include a guide for those who want to create digitally with a stylus and graphics tablet. So these books are a worthwhile investment because they really feel like comprehensive how-to guides. I especially like all of the artwork examples that are dotted throughout the book. A lot of these are drawn by the authors Jessica and Matt themselves, but they also highlight examples from comics drawn by other cartoonists that they like. So it's good to see the variety of possibilities that can be achieved with different styles. So check out the two books, Drawing Pictures and Writing Words, as well as Mastering Comics, both by Jessica Abel and Matt Madden.
It's going nowhere, all the night.
Now people, if you're going to buy any books from this list of recommendations, you really need to make sure that you buy Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud and Making Comics, also by Scott McCloud. I'm going to discuss both of these books at the same time because I can't imagine reading one without reading the other. So these are both books about comics that are actually drawn as comics themselves. Scott McCloud is so enthusiastic about the power of comics as a communication medium that he thought, well, I might as well demonstrate how good comics are by using comics to tell my story. Now this is an idea that makes a lot of sense because previous books that tried to teach comics, like Will Eisner's Comics and Sequential Art, tried to explain comics with essays of text. Now this might be sacrilege for me to say as a cartoonist, but I don't know about you, I find this Will Eisner book really hard to read. But on the other hand, I love the Scott McCloud books that Will Eisner ended up inspiring. These two Scott McCloud titles are books I'd recommend to anyone, whether you personally want to create comics or not, because they've got some great insights into the creative process generally. I guess it's a little bit like how it's interesting to learn about how a great musical album is made, whether you're a musician or not. And Scott McCloud does a great job of explaining some interesting insights into a lot of everyday things that we take for granted. Language, symbols, communication, art, human thought. Now, as you might imagine, of the two books, Understanding Comics mostly focuses on the theory behind comics. So Understanding Comics comes a little more from the reader's point of view, and the other book, Making Comics, comes at it more from the creator's point of view. So in Making Comics, Scott McCloud talks about everything from character design, storytelling, choosing which moments to show in your comics panels, creative, realistic and immersive worlds for your readers to enjoy, choosing which tools and materials to use as a comics artist, and many, many more things as well. It's worth noting that instead of being a book where Scott McCloud rigidly talks about how to draw comics exactly like him, actually the opposite is true. Scott McCloud, as you may know, is an enthusiast for the potential that comics have to tell many different types of stories in many different genres and styles. So he advocates artists being able to go wild and create comics on any topic and with any style they like. So he definitely encourages you, the comics artist, to consider your place in the world of comics and to consider how you can twist the format to make way for yourself and your stories in the world of comics. And I've definitely taken that to heart as a creator myself. After reading these books, I've chosen to go a little bit off the beaten track with my non-fiction comics about social issues and science experiments. So thanks to Scott McCloud for giving me a confidence boost to do what I'm doing. And just finally, one other thing that I really like about both of these books is how much Scott chooses to highlight the works of other cartoonists. He features artwork from other cartoonists and gives references to their books. So because of this, I've learnt about some of my favourite comics by reading these Scott McCloud books, and I've chosen to buy certain comics based purely on the strength of Scott's recommendations and maybe a little image from the book that I like. And by the way, that includes Blankets by Craig Thompson and Mouse by Art Spiegelman, both of which have become, which I became aware of through these books, both of which are now some of my favourite comics. So like I said before, I think you'll really like both of these books, whether you're a comics artist yourself or not. But for those of you who are budding comics artists, there really is no excuse for you to not have these two books in your collection. You need to buy Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud and Making Comics by Scott McCloud. So that's the end of my recommendations for the best books about creating comics. Please let me know if there are any books or resources that I missed. And now if this list was helpful and you'd like to buy some of the books that I've recommended, check out my book depository affiliate links below. If you make any book purchases through the book depository after clicking the link, I'll get a little referral kickback, which is just a nice way to, for you to thank me for pointing out these books to you, don't you think? And if you like these YouTube videos, please support my ongoing crowdfunding campaign. It actually does take quite a bit of time for me to make these videos and of course to draw my comics. So if you like these videos, please visit crowdfundstu.com. You can give me a little drip feed of monthly patronage to help keep the light on here. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.